most men don't realize the energetic and emotional and psychological impact of living out of alignment, of not saying what we're going to do, not keeping our promises. We don't understand how deeply that impacts us. And it actually doesn't allow us to fully expand in the way we're meant to expand. It doesn't allow us to feel free. It doesn't allow us to have that sense of thrust, to have that sense of power in our presence. There is just something that's energetically holding us back. And when we reclaim integrity, first we feel shame very often because things have to be cleared up. And we face that shame of having been out of integrity, which every man, if he is honest with himself, will eventually face.
Hi, I'm James, and you're listening to the Super Soul Model series. Today I'm joined by Lorin Krenn. Lorin is a globally sought after coach, author, hypnotherapist, and host of the Masculine Feminine Dynamics podcast. Lorin's work is known for being both spiritually deep and refreshingly real. Through his teachings on polarity, presence, and intimacy, Lorin's helped countless individuals navigate the sometimes messy but magical terrain of conscious relationships. And he speaks the language of the heart without shying away from the shadow. And he helps guide men and women to greater truth, greater love, and inner alignment. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome this week's guest, Lorin Krenn.
I'm honored to be here. Thanks for that powerful introduction, James.
So I think the best place to begin is at the beginning. How did this journey of teaching the masculine and feminine dynamics sort of stir your soul? What was your calling?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it makes sense to start at the beginning. As many teachings and sayings go, that the medicine and the gift we bring to this world, or our deepest service, is often starts with a very strong wound, starts with a lot of pain. I lost my father very early in my life. He died of colon cancer, and that was a really brutal battle. I mean, there were challenges in my childhood before that, but when he became ill, it was a 3-year battle with cancer, almost 4 years. And in the end, I was holding his hand, and he took his last breath. And that was the first time he said to me, "I love you." He couldn't say it properly anymore because he was already in a stage where his soul was about to leave his body. But I could read it from his lips, and somehow I could hear it in my mind, almost like an echo in that moment. And that experience really did change everything for me, as painful and also traumatizing as it was, because the ground taken underneath my feet, my masculine role model disappeared from one day to the other, and very soon realizing that the inevitability of death. So many of us are not aware that death is something that eventually will come. And I was very soon confronted with that, what I call a masterful teacher, death that it is. And of course, at the beginning, I didn't see it that way. There was so much pain. Who am I as a man? Still, my father and I had a challenging relationship, although in my healing work, I now have come to appreciate him much more now than I could appreciate him back then. But it was a very challenging relationship because his generational trauma, which for so many men um, was around emotional unavailability, being disconnected. I mean, he was there as a father and supportive, but emotionally he didn't really know what to do. And because his father didn't know what to do, and his grandfather didn't know what to do, and so on, right? That generational trauma that is passed down from generation to generation. Um, Long story short, all this pain and all this suffering about what it means to be a man led to a deep soul search. And it made me realize that instead of projecting onto the world, trying to look for a role model, I realized that perhaps I've been gifted with the gift of vision, and seeing the gap I'm seeing in the world and the gap in my own life meant I had to learn how to embody this. I referred to it differently back then, but finding a place of internal security and safety and working through that trauma. So that was the beginning of everything. Of course, many, many years of deep soul searching and facing myself in nature, being alone and going deep. But essentially, this kind of laid down the path, and it was the beginning of everything.
Thank you for sharing. I know it's raw, but I think every human being can relate to those really tough emotions because we all go through them, and you can't shy away from the tough emotions that we all have to deal with from time to time. And death is a teacher. And I really liked what you said, that you had to find a security in a void which wasn't really available. So it had to come from within, because sometimes we're gifted to have parents to guide us and give us that security, that home base. But when it's pulled from you by something like death, the only place you can go now is within. Otherwise, that just pain just continues and gets louder. So how did you deal with that?
Yeah,
How did you find that peace? You mentioned nature, but you know,
yeah.
what was, Lorin was a young boy when that happened. So how did he come back to find his center? And sure, it might have taken some time, but I think this is the thing that we all need to learn, and we can learn from you and your story.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it took many years, and there was a lot of suffering. I also, after his death, I had this reoccurring intrusive thoughts about what if I'm going to die, and the fear of death crept in. So there was a lot at play there, not just losing my role model, but also what does it mean to be a man afraid of death and the inevitability of death. There was a lot going on, and there wasn't necessarily just one specific practice that helped me. It was many different things. I would spend a lot of time in nature, but I would use this time very intentionally. It wasn't just me being in nature and being distracted. It was me walking for hours and hours and hours in deep nature, and also specifically stopping in certain spots in nature, like a beautiful lake or a beautiful tree, and sitting down and meditating. And another thing I did a lot was breath work. I trained myself with my breath. Um, many different modalities, specifically breathing methods around holding my breath, I found extremely powerful because in these moments of being able to hold my breath for, let's say, 2, 3 minutes or so, I would notice for a short moment that suffering and that pain and these intrusive thoughts, for 2 minutes, it was gone. And that was enough. Or sitting in nature and just closing my eyes or just looking at nature and becoming still for a short moment, I would experience these moments of, we could say, feeling myself as consciousness, but without even putting too much abstract spiritual language to it. I would just experience moments of non-suffering, the opposite of what I was experiencing, moments of freedom. And even though it was only for a brief moment, it was enough. Like
Yeah,
24 hours of suffering, or let's say 16 hours of suffering, and 2 minutes of short, very short peace and freedom. But that was enough because I realized that was so sweet, that was so powerful, and so divine and sacred in a sense, that it just kept me going and kept me going. There was a lot of releasing of trauma, specifically through breath work. I took this to an extreme, so there were moments where I did breathwork of 3, 4 hours. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that to everyone. I took it to an extreme, but I felt called and guided. And at all times, I felt a guidance, do this, train with this. It didn't always make sense to me, but I just went deep into it.
yeah.
And in all of this, after many years of trauma releasing, so to speak, at some point, I started to feel more safe, more secure. And in all of this, I found my purpose as well, my calling, my service in this life. And as painful as it all was, I wouldn't change anything now because it was exactly the path I had to go. It forced me, like you said powerfully before, James. You said I had to go within because there was no alternative. It felt too unbearable, the pain. So either go within or endure unbearable suffering. And
I love what you've just shared there, because when we can all look at our own stories, there's this beautiful relatability in our pain and in our struggle and in our awareness of like how we move through it. In my case, I began a daily meditation practice amongst other things, but that was the first thing. And my audience knows this because I share it pretty much all the time, but it was the bit that allowed that peace for 10 seconds or a minute in a 20-minute meditation. Like, oh, I've got silence for 1 minute. Wow. And I was sharing something with a client the other day. I was like, look, how's your meditation going? And it's like, well, it's messy. It's not always perfect. It's not always quiet. It's not always still. But if there's 10 seconds or a minute of silence, there's no thought. And with no thought, there's peace, there's silence. And then suddenly you experience that lovely moment of where everything's right again.
Yeah.
And you're not battling with the day, and this becomes fun, and I call this the green light zone where all the good stuff happens. So thank you for sharing, because there's this lovely relatability on that silence that you had, or that space, because that just makes you feel like, wow, I'm tuning back into Lorin. What do you believe is the most misunderstood thing about that masculine energy? Because you've talked a little bit briefly about like the generational emotional unavailability. If we're men in this world, and even the feminine in this world, how can we show up to have more beautiful relationships? And often it seems quite misunderstood.
Yeah.
So what's your
I,
take on that? Because this is really powerful. I've come from a modeling industry where I've been a male model for 20 years, and you're judged on the way you look, but it's also the dynamics of what's happening on the inside. And
mm,
if we can balance this out or learn from some of your work, then we can actually function beautifully with our partners and our relationships.
I think it's a great question. I think the confusion is very much related to that we haven't yet seen and experienced many men who actually model what we can call deep masculine or healthy masculine, or I like to call it awakened masculine energy. Simply because the models we're seeing right now are in a way outdated, and also they're unconscious models of what it means to embody masculine energy. That's where the confusion comes from. Let's talk about what we're seeing in today's world and what I believe is actually going to happen more and more unless a man does the deep inner work. One thing we're seeing more and more is the pleaser archetype, right?
Yeah.
Or in other words, the nice guy archetype, which I believe is actually becoming more and more. So 20, 30 years ago, it already existed, the
Right.
pleaser archetype. But I believe actually because of the world we're in and the confusion that we experience, and also the kind of shift around okay, men need to be more connected to their heart, for instance, in that we lose the primal. So I try to make this practical because there is a lot here, but I want to answer this question as powerfully as I can.
Excellent.
Um, so we can see the pleaser archetype a lot, which is all about not confronting, trying to accommodate, and kind of that mindset of if I just does, let's say in a relationship, if I just does everything she or their partner once, or then I'm gonna get my needs met, right? It's also called covert contracts in a sense
I like
of
that. Covert contracts.
covert contracts because
Yeah.
it's a contract that hasn't been agreed upon, and yet it's okay, I'm gonna do all these things that no one necessarily asked me to do
Yeah.
in the hope that I'm gonna get X, Y, and Z back. It's very transactional. And
Yeah.
then if I don't get these things met, anger is gonna erupt, resentment, or a sense of even passive aggression.
Makes sense.
So we see that, and then we also see the other extreme. We see men who are overcompensating for the lack of safety and security they feel, whether it's father wounds or mother wounds. We've got the kind of man who tries to be this alpha, but in this attempt is actually showing that it's a mask, it's an insecurity. There's a need to dominate others. There's a need to still be seen strong. And I would say the man who's still trying to be seen as strong by others is still doing it for validation. So whether it's the overcompensating, or whether through domination or aggression, or it is the people pleaser, it all comes down to that need for validation, that need to be validated, often through the feminine or other means, validated in one's masculinity, validated in one's manhood. And
Yeah.
the third model is what I call the awakened man, which is the man who is not losing himself in just being vulnerable all the time, but you've got both. You've got a strong spine and you have an open heart. You've got what is called in Buddhism, I believe, the middle ground. You've got both. There is fierceness, there is openness. And the more we see that, the more it starts to make sense. What is real masculinity actually about?
I love that. I had Dan Millman, who wrote the book Where the Peaceful Warrior, on the show a little while back,
That's a
and
powerful book, by the way.
yeah,
Wow.
and Dan's a great guy, and he is a fantastic teacher. And there was something that he wrote about in that book, which really reminds me of what you were just saying. And I was taking a walk in the forest and around the lakes where I live. And a few weeks back, when we were supposed to have this interview, there was an outage, right? So instead of me having an outage, I did an innage. So I went to go and tune myself back up. I thought, oh, there's no electricity, no Wi-Fi. So Lauren and I couldn't do this conversation. We couldn't have this podcast. So I wrote it wherever I could, hopefully that it would get through. We didn't know whether it's going to get to Lauren's team, but I decided there was nothing I could do. So I left my office. I left because there was nothing I could do, no electricity, no nothing. And I decided, okay, let's reconnect with James. Let's get back into his warrior spirit again. And what does that look like? What does that sound like? So I was like, right, I'm going to go for a hike and just go and lose myself and power up. And how this relates to what you just said about that middle ground, holding that fierceness whilst being an open heart. What I really love is how Dan talked about the peaceful warrior is a man who has strength and power and always has his blade sharpened, but it's always kept firmly in its sheath, never really to be used, but it's kept sharp through his discipline. And he never really needs to use that blade, that warrior, because he recognizes his heart and his boundaries are so strong that he is always in this beautiful middle ground. And I really like the way you mentioned the Buddhism and as well as that third archetype, the awakened man. I think that's really fantastic. And funnily enough, when I came out of that hike for a few hours, then the electricity gently came back on where I was. So I was really taken back by how, when we take care of our inner world, our outer world resets again or reboots. And I
So,
think that we can reboot society. We can reset the masculine energy that's within us, innate within every one of the men, which also is a guiding light for the feminine energy for them to feel safe. So that takes me into my next question. What is the misconception about feminine energy that we don't know about?
it's a powerful question as well. And also, I really like that metaphor of keeping the no need to draw the blade, but to keep it sharpened at all times.
Yeah.
It's an incredible metaphor. I really like that. Um, what is it about the feminine? I'd say for the feminine, for so many women in today's world, what's happening actually, there's a leaning more now towards actually an avoidant attachment style for women. So there's a lot going on in today's world, right? Where in the past women would more, and still of course, but in the past maybe 20, 30 years ago, women would lean more towards overgiving and pleasing tendencies. Whereas now you still have that, and you have more and more women who find themselves in this state of hyper independence, a state of being where and it's so important, women empowerment is so important, but it's almost like it starts to get to an extreme of we don't need men anymore, right? Men are not important, the masculine is not important, you can do everything on your own, and that in itself leads to a different sense of wound, right? And I believe that's a big misconception, that the idea of a strong woman is one who is hyper independent. I actually see strength in the feminine as the woman who chooses to embody love no matter what.
Mm.
It's what drew me to my wife. I would just feel in her presence this deep sense of love. I could just feel it in my heart.
This is really interesting because, having read some of your work and some of the things that you've been putting up on social and your newsletters, I think this is really interesting for the people who don't know you in the audience. You did have this very unusual attraction to your wife. Can you just tell us a little bit and try and make it sort of in a way that they can be like, wow, okay, this is how that magnetism came about? Because I think it's a really beautiful story of how
Yeah.
you shared it.
Thanks for that. Yeah. I'd call it my wife was drawn magnetically to my truth. I was drawn magnetically to her love. And of
Yeah,
course, truth and love are one and the same at the end of the day. The one who seeks truth will
yeah.
always find love. The one who seeks or embodies love will always speak and embody their truth. But without getting too abstract here, when my wife and I knew or felt that there was something deeper awaiting us, like
Were you
that
friends
saying,
before, or how was it? Like in the relatability factor. What was
we
the
were
setting?
friends before we met,
Okay,
and in that moment, our life changed. And
okay.
we both felt before like that saying of the invisible thread that connects two souls. We felt it. It was a deep knowing. It was incredibly intuitive. And when we met, I could just feel she's different. She's different to anyone who I've ever seen or met in my life before. And I felt this deep knowing I am meant to be with this person. This is the one for me. And that wasn't a concept, it was even beyond a feeling. It was transcendental, that experience, a transcendental spiritual experience. I mean, in my case, I even heard a voice that said, wherever you go, go with her. Whatever you do it with her. So it was crystal clear for me. And one of the first things I actually said to her when I met her, I said to her, here, this is my deepest purpose. And then I expressed to her what my deepest purpose in life was. And it was just, everything was different. And it was clear to us that we're meant to be together.
Okay, this is a really interesting thing you've just said here because I think this really goes into the next question I want to ask. Could you tell us a little bit about what makes the man magnetic and the right or the healthy feminine attract to the healthy male so we can understand what the patterns we are in or someone who's listening so that they can then begin to change what needs to be changed if it's not healthy and messy?
Yeah.
And it's to do with purpose, is where I'm sort of leading with this, because a man with a purpose is magnetic, but a man without any purpose is not magnetic, or at least not magnetic to the right type of person.
We step even a level deeper. I would say there's even another word that kind of describes it all, and that is truth. A man who lives and follows his truth will number one naturally find and connect with his purpose and true soul's mission in this life. But it's that element of truth. A man who makes the decision that he will only follow the truth, speak his truth. And what this naturally means is that reclaiming of integrity, which is one of the key foundations of the work I do in my men's groups.
Mm.
Reclaiming integrity. I like to say a man who looks in the mirror and looks at himself. And if in that moment there are truths that haven't been spoken, lies have been said, things are built on illusions, then he can never truly look in his eyes in the mirror. And it's a man who reclaims integrity. He can face himself in the mirror because he knows he lives a life of truth. And that is what I believe, not believe, that is what I know makes a man incredibly magnetic. That seeker of truth. There are no emotional games, there is no running, there is none of that. There is just truth. This is who I am, this is what I want, and this is where I'm going. And that level of clarity, that level of presence, that level of direction, purpose, and truth ultimately makes a man incredibly magnetic. And of course, not every woman will be drawn to him because if a woman is coming from a deep place of trauma. She might still be attracted to a man who is emotionally unavailable, and not her nervous system might confuse someone who is very unsafe with the familiar. But a woman who's done work on herself, that's the man she'll be drawn to.
Oh, this is interesting to go really deep. I just wanted to just touch briefly back on integrity before we can go to the next question, which I really wanted to go to. Like integrity, it was a little quote that I wrote today and I shared and posted. And for me, years ago, I didn't do what I said I was going to do. I was the guy who I feel like wisdom has only come to me because I've made so many errors until I'm going, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. So I like to be grounded, have humor, still look back on that other aspect of myself that was just learning or remembering who I really was. And I like to be light on myself, but I can look back and go, oh God, I caused myself unnecessary, unconscious suffering until it becomes conscious to go, I'm not going to do that anymore. But with regards to integrity, when you can actually look yourself in the mirror and go, I do what I say I'm going to do. I keep my promises. I keep my words. Anything that I've got that's out of balance, I try to rectify. I try to put right. I try to bring back into balance again. This puts peace back in my masculine heart. And then from that, I feel like I gain this real power. Because in my own experience of coming from unconscious behavior to conscious behavior, it's just because I've experienced more peace in my heart because I just keep it simple. And I'm not saying that I'm perfect, but I am saying that I do what I say I'm going to do. And anybody that knows me, I do fulfill what I'm going to say. And it also helps my mind believe that whatever goals I set or whatever it is though I'm drawn to, I know that it's possible for me because my mind goes, oh, he does do what he says he's going to do. And I think that this generates a power, an unseen power that you feel when you walk throughout your day, if you're a man. And I think that that's really important for the feminine energy as well. So give me a little take on that, if possible, please, because I think that that's
You just
something.
spoke to the core of it very
Yeah.
powerfully, James. You said it gives you that sense of power, and
Mm,
that's exactly what it is. Of course, it's what makes the feminine feel safe. But before we even go there, it's about what allows us to truly step in our power. We're
yeah.
not doing integrity for others because others feel safer with us. We're doing it for ourselves as well because it frees up all of that unnecessary suffering. We don't realize, most men don't realize the energetic and emotional and psychological impact of living out of alignment, of not saying what we're going to do, not keeping our promises. We don't understand how deeply that impacts us. And it actually doesn't allow us to fully expand in the way we're meant to expand. It doesn't allow us to feel free. It doesn't allow us to have that sense of thrust, to have that sense of power in our presence. There is just something that's energetically holding us back. And when we reclaim integrity, first we feel shame very often because things have to be cleared up and we face that shame of having been out of integrity, which every man, if he is honest with himself, will eventually face. And at first it's not empowering. At first it's painful because you realize, fuck, I've caused others and myself perhaps deep pain. And yet in moving and doing what is right, even if it's painful in that moment, there's an incredible level of peace, freedom, and power that comes with that, just as you mentioned already.
So when we're talking about high achievers and high performance men and women, usually it's an external need to prove to oneself or to someone to get validation. How can you still remain in a healthy sense of self, a healthy masculinity in this case? I'm just going to talk about men, to still be a high achiever, yet still keep that, because there's still this wound where someone needs to prove themselves to somebody or something or a lot of people. So what's your take on that?
I think that we often like to put things into boxes in the sense of, oh, someone who is a high achiever, they're just doing it to prove themselves. And then in that moment, it's a very negative box, isn't it? It's like, oh,
We've already established a
look at
negative.
that high achiever who is overworking himself, burning himself to the ground, just doing this because he wants to still prove to his father or to anyone else.
Yeah,
And when we're honest, there might be an element of that in many overachievers.
yeah.
Yet there is also a natural drive in many overachievers. And there is beauty in ambition. There is power in a man who says, I want to gain mastery in something. There is power in a man who says, I want to create something big. I want to make a true impact in the world.
I love that. I love that. I love what you've just said there because there's a couple of things where I've noticed sports men and women say, particularly men, where the father hasn't recognized the son who's now performing at a super high level in sports. I'll give you an example. David Beckham's father didn't give him any credit until he got his 100th English cap in football, and he's like, oh, he said, well done, son. He was like, wow, that was the first time I'd heard that after his 100th English cap. And then when I've looked at, different people either that I've worked with or studied, there's this similar thing. But I think what I really like that has made some clarity, you said there's beauty in ambition. And I really, really like that because that just makes it all clear. It's like, it's good to want to succeed. It's natural for you to succeed, but you've got to have and want to have the drive as long as you're using it for a force for good.
Exactly. And that's the power of it. Because at the end of the day, if we were to say that having drive and ambition is solely trauma and unworthiness, it would mean no one would really make a big impact who steps in their power and truth. But we need people who make a big impact, who step in their power and truth. Because the truth is, there are people who are not coming from a place of genuine intentions and who very much succeed in their life. So we do need ambition. We need people, and there is nothing wrong with being driven, with being driven and really wanting to succeed in life. And there is even that too is part of healthy masculine energy. It's just when it's only about needing to prove, it leads to burnout. There is no moment of receiving. There is a sense of, well, I could burn myself to the ground and then I don't receive anything. Like I push everyone away who wants to give me love. That
Exactly.
is when it gets out of
I think
balance.
it's those relationships that can be pulled or very challenging, at least for the clients that I have worked with, is that they find it very challenging because they've succeeded in their work, succeeded in doing financially very well, but found it particularly challenging with their relationships because there's a pull on that. And it's to do with presence, or should I say a lack of presence in relationships. But I really like the way you said that because if you're using it for good, it's almost fueling back the heart. Because I think it's a natural fuel for the heart to be open, for the man to be in his power. So, what does it take for a woman to open her heart then? If the masculine seeks truth and the feminine seeks or is love, how does that feminine energy stay in her heart or love?
As the feminine, I sometimes refer to it as the oracle. The feminine has that intrinsic, deeper connection the more she awakens with an almost like a sense of internal guidance, which I call the mirror. It's a part inside her that is able to spot our blind spots as men in a way hardly anyone could ever do. That is why so much of our suffering and emotional suppression as men in relationships is being exposed. She doesn't do that consciously, but somehow it comes up in the relationship. We cannot get away with a lack of presence. We cannot get away with total disconnect. We cannot get away with emotional suppression because in the relationship and in the mirror of the feminine, it becomes exposed. It becomes revealed, right? That is the medicine of the feminine. And for a woman to open her heart, it's all about being able to give herself permission to fully become to become that oracle, to become that oracle that is not afraid to choose love, whatever the moment requires. And sometimes choosing love means being fierce. The way I like to put it is a very conscious woman will love in a very unconditional or as close as unconditional love as it gets because she rather lose a man who is losing himself than keep him for her own selfish gain. What I mean by that is that if the moment requires it, and choosing love means choosing her own heart and being fierce or guarding her own heart even for a moment, not from a place of hypervigilance, but from a place of truth. That is what choosing love means. It's not overgiving, it's not overextending. It all depends on the moment. And when a woman allows herself to fully become that, without shrinking, without bending, or without going into a state of hypervigilance and all men are bad, right? Or demanding men to compensate for the pain she experienced with the masculine. Many women with father wounding, they will demand an impossible level of safety from the masculine, for instance.
Mm.
But without going too deep into these nuances here, it's really about the ability to become the oracle fully and wholeheartedly. And
And
such a woman, you can feel it in her presence. It's different. It's
so
just
what does her
different.
presence feel like that? So if a man meets a woman who's in her heart, who's in this oracle, is it an archetype or what would you call it?
We can call it an archetype. That's fine.
Let's just
I
say,
love
or in the
archetypes.
energy, if she's in the energy where her heart is open, what will an unhealthy masculine feel and what would a healthy masculine feel? Because that's
Yeah,
probably the
that's a
best way.
great question. I would say the unhealthy masculine energy would feel that she's a threat. A threat
Good.
to what? To her ego, to his ego, and to his shadow.
Love it. Okay. And then the healthy masculine would feel, what would he feel?
The healthy masculine would still perhaps feel challenged in that moment, which is a natural part of expansion for us men. But at the same time, he will feel the power and the courage and warriorship in these moments to not run away, to shrink, to close his heart and shut down, but instead to stay with an open heart in that storm, in the fire of love, to stay with the fire of love.
This is a really interesting thing, right? So here's something that I think most men can um, relate to. When men have a challenge with their partner, men tend to run away, but that's very, very hard for the feminine energy because when the fire's there, the men just naturally wants to draw back. It's a bit like, if we look at the biology of the man and the woman, the masculine gives and the feminine receives. But when the fire is happening, the men just tend to want, I'm just going to get out of here. It's going to be way easier that I don't have to deal with this chaotic feminine energy right now. Let me go to the bar or the pub or whatever. Tell me why that happens and why that energetically happens with regards to the masculine and feminine.
What's so interesting in that moment is that a man who is unconscious, he will blame her. He will say, I'm feeling not good, right? She's chaotic, she's crazy, she is XYZ. But the fundamental truth in this life remains no one can make you feel anything in that sense. No one has the power to just place a feeling right now into your body. There is something inside us that is responding, something inside us that is becoming reactive. And it's that reactivity that we need to look at. Because if a man says, okay, this relationship is really not in alignment, there is a sense of grounded energy around it. There is clarity. This is not in alignment, but there is no running to the pub. There is no running to the bar. There is no need to escape. That reactivity and that escape reveals that something has been touched. And what has been touched? The things he most likely has been avoiding a lifetime.
Love it. So it's basically true avoidance, right? So you're avoiding a difficult discussion. You're avoiding opening up. You're avoiding perhaps even speaking your truth, which is probably what the healthy masculine does. This is my truth. And then the feminine can open her heart if the man's speaking her truth. But if he's not speaking his truth, challenge. That makes total sense. Okay, so next question. What about not avoidance, polarities? The polarities so that the man can really, really be strong in his polarity, the woman can be in her polarity. Have we discussed this properly, or is there anything else that you could add so that people could understand what the polarity is and to be in that healthy polarity in a relationship?
The biggest misconception people have about polarity is that they believe it means becoming something they're not. A man has to be masculine, a woman has to be feminine, but that has to be a certain way. It's just another box. And the idea of polarity, or at least sacred polarity, and these ancient teachings, which are as old as time itself, is not to place someone in a box, but it's just a returning to our true essence. Many men have a masculine essence, which doesn't mean they don't have feminine energy, but the masculine energetic is the more dominant energetic. Many women have a more dominant feminine energetic, but that's not always the case. Either way, whatever one's core essence is, this work is about returning to our true essence. And when we return to our true essence, it's not that we try to mold ourselves to become something. It's that we become fully and wholeheartedly ourselves. And only when we become fully and wholeheartedly ourselves can the natural flow of intimacy and love actually be there. Because love is not something we create, love is not even something we do. Love is something that is already there. So it's a natural flow that is already there when we return to who we truly are. That flow of intimacy, the flow of love, we can call it, we create intimacy effortlessly, right? Because it's not something we have to do, it's something that's naturally there when we return to who we truly are. And that's what this is about. So when a man has a masculine essence and he returns to who he truly is, which means no longer avoiding or running, but facing himself in the fire of painful emotions or a painful conversation or something coming up in relationship to the feminine, for instance, that naturally creates intimacy. And that is why so much of what we hear about masculinity is rooted in insecurity, because it's rooted in becoming something we are not. But when we return to who we truly are, that just flows effortlessly.
I'm quite candid and happy to share, but when I look into my own experience and have challenges with my partner, it's always like I'm happy to share my feelings and I'm to share where I'm at and speak my truth. And I always find that in speaking the truth, whilst it's a storm and very uncomfortable, I always feel better knowing that I've been able to be direct, even though it's hard. But yeah, what have you got to lose? Because death is the ultimate, right? So if you think that death is the most scary, and I've had plenty of death in my life, so I recognize, well, if that's as hard as it can be when someone you love up close and personal takes off from this world, physically, not soulfully, but physically, then what's left is really facing you. So I see, and I'd really like to know what your thoughts and feelings are with regards to your work. I see that relationships between two people, or any people for that matter, as an absolute mirror, total mirror. It's the most spiritual, strongest training you have to go through as a warrior to know yourself, to find peace with yourself so that your mirror or your partner, meaning your mirror, can be at peace too. And can you be at peace and harmony and return to love time and time again when that mirror gets a little dirty or gets a bit messy. What's your take on that?
I like to say relationships are spirituality embodied.
Love it.
We're on the mat, we're doing a meditation, beautiful, but it's the preparation for the real dojo, for the real training ground, which is relationships, the art of relating. It's the place where we show to the universe and to ourselves, can I actually bring this into the everyday? Can I bring it into the imperfect? Can I bring it to the mess that then turns into almost a form of divine mess in all of this? I completely agree with that. That's the core of what my work is about, that I see the art of relating as perhaps even the highest spiritual path, because it is exactly in what you said already. There is something in union and in relationships that is nowhere else. It's that constant mirror, that constant feedback. Where are you not showing up? Where are you not in integrity? How are you still closing your heart? How are you still projecting onto others? How are you still punishing others for not having unrealistic expectations met? How are you still going cold? All these things are revealed. And then most people run away from that. And those who actually pause and face that, they will experience the highest spiritual, emotional expansion and maturity through relationships.
So I've got a couple more questions, Lauren, and I really want people to go, wow, this could really make my life so much better. The sacredness of, or the sacred union between, let's just say, in instance, in a same-sex relationship, a masculine and feminine, let's talk about. If that is a sacred union, how does that become sacred? Is that only when one has healed their wounds? Because people hear, oh, what's a sacred union or a
Yeah.
tantric union? Well, you know, you have this philosophy, but let's just put it in a grounded understanding. What does that actually mean? And then how would you step into that?
It doesn't mean we have to become perfectly healed, because when are we ever perfectly healed? As long as we're here, there is healing to do. As long as we breathe, as long as we breathe, there is work to do. All it means is that two people make the choice to choose evolution over everything. The evolution of their soul, to choose growth, to choose expansion, to choose awakening and awareness and consciousness above everything. And it's that mutual choice and that coming together that then naturally brings the sacred into a relationship.
Oh, I love that. So if one person seeks that, but the other person don't, does that mean the parties will drift?
Yes, they would. So eventually, what happens, I like to say, when we reach a certain level of awakening and spiritual expansion in our life, there are only two responses to us. People fall away or people deepen with us.
Oh, I
But there
like that.
really isn't a third, because the third is still tied to us shrinking, playing small, not confronting, and being afraid to live and embody our highest truth. So, yes, to your question, it would drift, and eventually it would get so challenging that either the party that is still hiding and running away makes the choice to shift, or it would lead to parting of ways.
Okay. So if a man is in his healthy masculine, how does that affect abundance, the abundant embodiment, and the same for the feminine?
Now, there are two elements to this. There is the individual element, and then there is the union element. Talking about the union element, when a conscious man or a man who chooses this work is together with a woman who also chooses this work from the depths of her heart, then there is a natural element of abundance that will enter. Why? Because I mean, everyone listening, you can you can feel into this from this perspective. If you feel deeply at home, if your heart feels so open and you're becoming more and more of yourself, and speaking your truth leads to you being seen and heard and deeper intimacy and love, then quite naturally in that energy, we become more abundant because our energy is abundant in that sense, an abundance of love, an abundance of safety, right? And then financial abundance is something that very often will naturally follow from that because we're in such alignment. But there is also, of course, the individual for the people who are still on the journey, which are many, many on the journey of attracting their divine counterpart or the relationship that truly meets them in their heart's depth. And for them too, of course, this applies because when we embody our healthy masculine or healthy feminine energy, then by nature we're in alignment. And when we're in alignment, we just become much more powerful creators because what we speak has weight behind it. Our energy, our presence is different. And people can feel that. I mean, everyone listening here or watching, when someone is in deep pain, they cannot really serve you and be there for you, or at least only to a certain degree. But if someone is truly in alignment, right, their presence has a completely different quality to it.
Yeah, I really like the way you've said that. That's really beautiful. And I just wanted to sort of just touch on something you said there, which was when you are speaking your truth, there's this security that you have. That security is like your root that keeps you grounded. And then also when you're speaking your truth and you're not afraid to speak it, you have incredible self-worth, all tied to financial abundance. So that energy is naturally aligned, which means you're magnetically sending out to life and the quantum field, hey, I feel very comfortable with myself. I'm very proud of myself and I can be of service, which means that you are naturally magnetic and attract greater abundance. And it might be financial abundance that comes to you as a result. We can see that from this type of work of why it's so powerful. And leading into my last question, Lauren, because this is so enlightening and interesting, is when we can have that sacred union and be with ourselves, how does our sexual relationship deepen? Because I think that this is really, really important, that men and women can recognize that sex can be even better when we do the work on ourselves. And I'm not saying you have to do any sort of strange sexual practices. But what I'm trying to talk about really is talk about that we are sexual beings and you can't deny that. But when we understand ourselves and try and grow as into our healthy masculine or into our healthy feminine, what actually happens, I believe, is an absolute unfolding of a deepening sexual enjoyment and nourishment. What's your take on that?
You said it already really well here, James. Sex is very much dependent on our state of consciousness.
Yeah.
Because if we are in a state of consciousness of complete avoidance and disconnect and being unconscious, then our sex life will resemble that. It will be just another mirror for that. We
So
will
it
only
might just be a
experience
transaction instead of something
exactly.
deep and nourishing and enjoyable.
Or it might even be trauma, which we can call which I call eroticized wounds,
Okay, fair.
where not working through our trauma becomes this strong sexual pull towards, for instance, someone who is emotionally unavailable or someone who is playing hot and cold dynamics, right? That in itself resembles a very unconscious dynamic. And as you said, as we do the work, as we go deeper, there is a natural deepening in every dimension, whether it's relationships or sex or business or even finances, in every dimension. And sex is a good example because it's something where it's so tangible. Because now there isn't just eroticized wounds or just fantasy or just transactional, as you said just now. There's a deeper component here. Now the heart is open and activated in that moment. The breath is deeper. There's this element of presence. And the experience of sex becomes one that is so infinitely more nourishing than anything else before could ever lead to.
Oh, I like that. And I think that, if you want to enjoy life, I think you want to do the work, because then that aspect of yourself can be awakened, and you'll have a level of deeper satisfaction that we're not always familiar with, because we haven't been told, because it's generational, or whatever you've been picked up is societal. But there's like this other level of energy that is now present that wasn't present before, because you grew as an individual, you grew to heal the challenges that you've had, to look at yourself and speak your truth if you're a male, and open your heart and be love if you're the female. So I'm really in awe of your work and what you've shared, and you know, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Is there anything, Lorin, that you would like, people to really sort of take away that maybe you hadn't touched on, that could be something for them to go, I could improve my life just by something that you could share now?
One other thing I would give to everyone listening and or watching this episode is that at the end of the day, our journey of healing, or what we desire in a relationship, what we desire in business, what we desire for ourselves, for our own individual goals, all is tied to our level of healing and our level of consciousness. So many times, specifically men, there is this idea, okay, I'm doing the work because of. But it's only when it becomes this choice that one says, okay, this now becomes the highest priority because everything else depends on it. That's where life just gains a much deeper vastness and depth. It's the choice from we make from deep within to not constantly need to face suffering and experience consequences to change things, but to decide from this moment forward that one chooses evolution and expansion and growth above all. And when that choice is made, then everything else naturally falls into place.
Oh, Lauren, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your wisdom, your heart, and your truth, and your presence with us today. And if you've really enjoyed this conversation, I'm going to leave all the links for Lauren's work and his workshops. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Really appreciate the conversation, James. Really powerful questions, and you brought a lot of depth into this container. Thank you for that.
Lauren is this week's Super Soul Model.